Hey y'all, this is Ruthie from TAO, and we're just going to take a couple more minutes to make sure we can get everyone in on the call, and then we'll get started.
All right, hello and good evening. Apologies, I'm having one of those work from home moments. This is my dog, and he was just running around in the backyard and did not want to come inside. So, oh, and now he's gonna try and bite me and he's covered in briars. Okay, cool. So we're gonna deal with that later. Good to see everybody. Got about 30 people out there. And I see some of the chat. I'll go ahead and start. So for those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Kara Snow. And in addition to dog wrangling, my 5-pound Chihuahua, I'm the Chief Community Engagement Officer at the Technology Association of Oregon. I'm the interim director of our Southern Willamette Valley office, so the Eugene, Springfield area, and also manage all of our cyber security initiatives statewide. And about, 18 months ago, Leah Howell from the University of Oregon came to us and said, we'd really like to start an ISSA chapter in the Southern Willamette Valley. It's a little far to get to Portland. Could we partner with TAO? And so I think they're unique in one of the only ISSA chapters in the country that are doing that right now. And so really this is about ISSA, but it's also about the fact that throughout the Pacific Northwest, we are really committed to that intersection of technology and trust. And for us, that manifests itself in cybersecurity. And we are seeing the Southern Willamette Valley area of our state and region be a center of that. So that's a little bit of context. And this is a really fun and interesting cybersecurity meetup for us. We've got about 31 people on there. And with the blessing from the ISSA chapter in Portland, we are presenting this as a statewide event. And through the beauty of COVID-19 challenges, we also have presenters who are not just local to Oregon. So this is a really interesting opportunity, really neat. Yeah, so I'm going to go on to the next slide and talk about our rules of engagement. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Secureworks. If you are not familiar with them, I'm sure Jeffrey Carpenter will give you a little bit of intel on them as he is one of their employees. And if you are in the Southern Willamette Valley, Eugene area, you had the opportunity to get a growler or two of beer, courtesy of the Secureworks team. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask something a little weird, and I don't normally do this. We're pretty conscientious at TAO to not post a bunch of people drinking alcohol, but our content from events is getting pretty stale when just taking screenshots of everyone on Zoom. Not that we're wonderful, not that y'all aren't wonderful and lovely. So if you get an opportunity and you feel comfortable, maybe take a selfie during this presentation and share that to our Twitter feed. It's at Tech Oregon, and we'll probably compile those and put it together. And yeah, we can definitely thank Secureworks and the ISSA board for that. So as soon as I hand it over, I will also go and grab my glass of wine. But from a rules of engagement standpoint, all of our participants have been muted, and video can be suppressed. If you chose to turn on your video or you unmute yourself, that is fine. We prefer to do that to make it a little more streamlined and a little less talking over each other. We ask you to disable your camera unless you're presenting. So once I'm done talking, I'll actually disable mine. And all of our speakers tonight are going to go in order. This was originally supposed to be a panel. Panels are a little more challenging if you are doing this virtually. So we're going to do this as 4 distinct presentations. And our speakers are going to open it up for Q&A after each presentation, and then at the end we will have Q&A. So you can feel free to raise your hand. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with that functionality, but if you see at the bottom, if you select the participants icon, you have some options to vote yes, no, go faster, go slower, and then on the more, there are options to say need a break. I don't know that you need to share that with us. We're home. We can all just get up and walk away. We'll clap at the end. There's a like, there's a dislike. But if you would like to raise your hand, let's just go with the thumbs up option for this evening. And then any questions that you don't want everyone to see, you can feel free to send to me at Kara Snow or to the TAO admin, and we will help get those out there. We may also decide, if you follow the rules and raise your hand from a participant standpoint, that you can talk yourself, and we will unmute folks if they can't do it on their own. So that was a lot of rules of engagement for an evening event that I started off by saying, take a picture of yourself drinking. So I'll go on to our next slide. And this is the crew that is bringing this to you, except Justin Martinez tonight is being played by Ruthie Ditzler, who supports our events statewide, which is an interesting proposition now that we're running all of them from Portland. So Ruthie's on the back end. Oh, and I will respond. I see some private questions coming into me, so I will respond as necessary. I guess I should ask, can everybody hear me? Maybe clap or thumbs up me.
I can hear you just.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I see a thumbs up. Okay, great, good. We're using I see a check. That's a yes. Fantastic. Good use of the participant stuff. All right, next slide. So we talked about how to do this. Round robins are tough. We're all figuring out the online and virtual presentation world. So thanks for hanging with us. Each speaker is going to get an opportunity to say a few words about themselves and their company. I am going to try to get this one right, but Christian and I talked about that I was going to screw his last name up. So we've got Christian Rankin. I don't know. Maybe he'll give me a thumbs up on that one. I was trying hard. With CrowdStrike, Leah Howell from University of Oregon, Tiffany Murray from Yubico, and then we'll round it out with Jeff or Jeffrey Carpenter, whether he prefers the longer or shorter version of his name, from Secureworks. Each of them will have about 15 minutes. We'll be running their slides, so you'll hear a lot of next slide, please. And then at the end, we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A, and don't forget to Twitter us your selfie with your growler, your computer, your dog. And with that, I am right on time to stop talking, and I will suppress my video. And Christian, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. Can I get a confirmation that you can all hear me? Anyone?
Confirm.
Sweet, thank you. All right, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me here. Thank you to Secureworks, and I hope all of you are safe where you are, and that goes for you and your families. So thank you for having me. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So just a quick introduction as to who I am. My name is Christian Rankin. I'm a strategic threat advisor here at CrowdStrike. I've been at CrowdStrike for about 6 months now. Before joining CrowdStrike, I was an analyst for about, an Intel analyst for about 4 years, of which my most recent role was in the strategic intelligence realm. Basically what I'd have to do there is I was the one writing RFIs. I was researching the global threat landscape. I was doing actor profiling, stuff along those lines. And before that, I was more on the SIGINT side of Intel, so signals intelligence. And basically, I would monitor clients' digital footprints by kind of looking for threats over the open, deep, and dark web. That is a position that I occupied at both the entry and senior level. And in terms of clients that I've worked with before, I've worked with clients from SMB to Fortune 500 from a lot of different industries. So next slide, please. Yeah, this will be a lot of next slide, please. Can you go ahead and actually, yeah, just load the whole slide before, yeah, right there. Okay, so really what I wanted to kind of focus on first off was kind of zoom out a little bit before COVID and just kind of talk about how opportunism has been on the rise with these threat actors for a while. So I want to start out with a quote from the CrowdStrike CEO, George Kurtz. This was in our global threat report, which I'm guessing he made this quote around November or December, saying the ransomware epidemic will continue and worsen so long as the practice remains lucrative and relatively easy and risk-free. So basically why I wanted to put that up there is these threat actors are incredibly opportunistic. And while they're using COVID-19 as a way to increase basically the chances of them financially profiting off of these scams, highlighting threats in that way is nothing new. So one thing that we're quite concerned about, and one thing that we track quite closely within CrowdStrike, is something called big game hunting. So really this was kind of the shift in operations besides many years ago when ransomware would kind of be delivered to the certain individual, and the ransom payment would be asked to be paid for much less than those numbers that you're seeing now. And big game hunting is really the shift to targeting larger organizations and really dangling that decryption key in front of them for quite a large sum of money. So if you look there in 2018, you see Indrix Spider, Grim Spider, and Boss Spider. So Boss Spider made $6.7 million in 2018. That group is actually retired now. That's an Iranian e-crime group, and they retired because of indictments from the United States, and because they're operating in Iran and not Russia, they don't really have that Russian veil of protectivity surrounding them, so they stopped their operations. But what I wanted to focus on is kind of from that 1.5 million to 3.7 to 6.7, from early 2018 to late 2019, a group that we track is Wizard Spider, who operates TrickBot and Ryuk. They made about $100 million in Bitcoin. So really what my point is here is this big game hunting is working. They're making a lot of money, and the incentives to keep doing what they're doing are still there. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just a quick adversary highlight. So this is Mummy Spider. This is the group we track that operates the Emotet loader. Originally started in late 2014 in Germany and Switzerland as a banking Trojan, and then they kind of changed their tactics to more on the side of a loader. And basically, what is Emotet? So Mummy Spider is one of the world's most prolific distributors capabilities. They have the most prolific distribution capabilities, with partnerships such as Drydex, Quackbot, Panda Zeus, and TrickBot. If you remember from my previous slide of Wizard Spider making about 100 million, that came from that usually comes from Emotet to TrickBot to Ryuk. So in terms of COVID-19, basically what we're seeing, how we're seeing Mummy Spider use this is they're doing something called email thread hijacking, which basically means that they're inserting themselves within email threads of correspondence within a company, which makes the email look a lot more legitimate. And so if there's any type of lure in those emails, it's more likely to be clicked on. So think of that as kind of I think of it as almost like more of a blurred line between phishing and spear phishing, just because of how successful that is. Just for the time, can we next slide, please? Thank you. Now, moving on to Wizard Spider. I'm sorry that image isn't populating there. In terms of Wizard Spider, so these are the guys that does Spider have a significance, or is it a common theme? So good question, Andrew. So the way that we classify certain threat actors, pandas are Chinese, bears are Russian, kittens are Iranian, tigers are Indian, and for any e-crime groups, we call them spiders. Emotet, Mummy Spider, Emotet, that's, if you can see the connection there, that's why we called it that. So basically the way that, one way that Wizard Spider is kind of capitalizing on this moment is they're using TrickBot dynamic web injects and distributing that to basically financial institutions in Italy. Basically they're using that COVID-19 pandemic to really kind of take advantage of what's going on in Italy. It's really sad to see, but that's what they're doing there. So next slide, please. So what's going on here? So moving from spiders, which were the e-crime groups, now more towards nation state level activity. So this is a group we track called Pirate Panda. A lot of what they do is targeting governments, particularly those that are involved in South China Sea disputes. They often use custom remote access tools. One common one that's distributed throughout a lot of different pandas. I think we track about 45 different pandas. A lot of them have retired, but that's the amount of pandas that we've tracked since 2011, I believe. So they distribute something called a poison ivy remote access tool. And the way that they're doing this, and this is not just a theme through my presentation, I'm sure this will be a theme through everyone else's presentation, but a lot of these attacks are coming from COVID-19 themed lures. So basically, a phishing email or a spear phishing email that claims to have certain information regarding COVID-19 that depending on what you make that email look like, who you make it look like it's coming from, it's more likely to be clicked on. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd kind of get into disinformation campaigns. So something like this isn't too pertinent to your own network security, but it's something that I'm personally really concerned with, and us at CrowdStrike monitor this quite closely. So in terms of controlling the information space, this is really something that nation states are really competing over, and sadly the crisis that's happening with COVID-19 right now is ripe for information warfare. So one thing that Iran is doing, it's on the left, we track those actors as kittens, is they're kind of pushing information out in an attempt to really sow chaos among strategic adversaries, saying that COVID-19 is a biological weapon manufactured by the United States. And in terms of China, they're doing a couple different things. For example, we just reported on China as well, saying this was basically started out of the United States, and they're starting to, they basically have teams that use social media, much like the Internet Research Agency, to push narratives in different languages, and we've just started tracking them, starting to do that in Italy now. So they're pushing that narrative in Italy. But in this case, we've seen them blame Taiwanese officials for kind of covering up infection cases, so kind of lying about what's really going on. So it's very much calling the kettle black, if you ask me. But next slide, please. So yeah, this is just kind of to go off of what I was just talking about. Basically, China is claiming that the coronavirus is starting in the United States, and they're really trying to wage this information warfare, and really just kind of try to pump out this narrative as quickly as they can. So next slide. I think that might have been it, but yeah. Anyway, that's I tried to be cognizant of the time. Maybe I rushed a little bit, but I hope that was somewhat informative. And yeah, if you have any questions, please ask.
Yeah, that leaves us time for some questions, Christian. I'll ask one that was sent to me privately, and I'll follow up with all of y'all, or you can shoot me a note or say yes or no here. Are we able to distribute your slides?
Yeah. I can. I'll send them to you, or I'll send them to Justin, and I can get those out. Yeah.
No, we've got them. We're all set. So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yes, you can do that. Yeah.
Any questions for Christian?
This is Jason from CrowdStrike, and I was just gonna thanks Christian for running through all that stuff. There was a question that got asked from Andrew in the chat that was asking about the designation of spider and what that meant. So I posted in that link in the chat there where folks can go look at the different adversaries and different naming conventions. But Christian, maybe you could address that to the group and kind of give them format for how we name these different threat actors.
Sure. So I kind of alluded to it, but with spiders, that's geographically agnostic, but that is going to be those are your e-crime adversaries. So while I say geographically agnostic, most of them operate out of Russia. Those are going to be your Inject Spider, Wizard Spider, Doppel Spider, those kind of groups. There are some, for example, we track a Canadian spider. There are certain spiders around the world that aren't just Russian. Like I said earlier, there was Boss Spider, which was operating out of Iran. But in terms of other names, yeah, Bear is going to be, that's Russian nation state backed. So if you remember, like Fancy Bear hacked the DNC, that was kind of a big thing that CrowdStrike did in 2016. So Fancy Bear, that's a group out of the GRU. In terms of Chinese nation state actors, you've got, we call them pandas. Let's see, Iran is kittens. North Korea is going to be it's actually the national animal of North Korea. It's called a cholima. It is a mythical winged horse, and we've checked, they're not real, but still we go by that. Let's see, South Korea's cranes. Yeah, we have a whole list of adversaries that we track, but basically the animal that they go by is how we track them by their either nation state, e-crime, or hacktivist. And hacktivist is going to be jackals.
Christian, I'm going to have a hard time ever looking at anything cuddly, cute, or mystical again. But I have a question. Have we seen any spiking in our area? So I'm pretty sure you're based in Denver, but that would be like specific to Oregon and the I-5 corridor in particular.
So I don't know about Oregon. That actually doesn't really come into what I look at day to day. There's definitely been spikes in e-crime activity around the world. So I'd be surprised if the spike didn't include Oregon. But I think the spikes they're mostly going to rely around certain types of, so for example, they'll most likely be spikes around certain industries. So e-commerce, for example, is one that's being targeted a lot right now. So I don't think it's mostly, it depends on the type of attack. There's a lot of different types of attacks, but in terms of if things are spiking in Oregon compared to Washington, let's say, I don't know the answer to that.
I could chime in real quick. So this is Jason again with CrowdStrike. I focus on the state, local government, and higher education within Oregon, Washington, Alaska, but I'm based in Oregon, of course. I will say that there has definitely been an uptick in the activity as it pertains to the elections, specifically in Oregon and Washington. So we're working with the state of Oregon currently to secure the election piece of it. And other than that, I'm getting feedback from customers and folks that are inquiring about more so on the state level than the local and the city county level, but definitely we're seeing a higher uptick for sure.
Well, I've got one more question and then we'll move on to Leo, but I've also got a comment from Harry, and I think it's in relation to the mythical animal that doesn't exist, but that Kim Jong-un might disagree with you. I would venture to bet that he would probably disagree with you. And then one last question, is there a big overlap between e-crime and state-backed activity?
So do you mean in terms of COVID or just in general? It depends on the adversary. So the lines are starting to blur. So for example, just in terms of sophistication, we actually rank e-crime activity as more sophisticated than Iran. In terms of the overlap, the biggest overlap that you're going to see between e-crime and nation state is probably going to be something like in North Korea, where they're technically a nation state, but a lot of the a lot of their TTPs, a lot of what they're going for, which is to capitalize financially, that aligns a lot more with the kind of modus operandi of the e-criminal landscape, where for nation state levels, that's where you're going to see more espionage. So, you know, IP theft or corporate espionage or something along those lines, where you won't really see that from an e-crime perspective too much.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, everyone go into your participant more and give Christian a clap. That was awesome. And thank you so much. And we'll transition it over to Leo. And if you've got more questions at the end, we hopefully have some time built in for that, but that was really insightful and enlightening. And Leo, the screen is yours.
Thanks, guys. And thanks, Cara. Thanks to Secureworks for sponsoring this, and for all the speakers that are coming up. I am excited to hear the other presentations. I think Christian did a pretty good job. I did want to acknowledge that we also have several board members of ISSA online. So if you're online, raise your hand or something so everybody knows who you are. And thanks to everybody for jumping in and helping to do this. I hope we don't have to function this way for a very long time, but for the foreseeable future, it looks like we may be doing virtual things. But so far, this is working out well. So thanks to everybody who put this together. So I'm Leah Howell. I am the current president for ISSA Eugene and the CISO at the University of Oregon. And next slide, please. I'm just going to spend just a few minutes to share some experience with you guys about what we did at the University of Oregon shifting to remote work. Obviously, lots of challenges popped up at us, but there's also some ways to get around those challenges. So I'll touch on those as well. And I'll talk about opportunities because I'm sort of a guy that looks at the glass half full. So I'm going to talk about some opportunities that I'm trying to exploit as we move into this new mode of work. Next slide. Thank you. So just a quick background of where we were before COVID. And remember, this is probably 6 to 8 weeks ago, right? So the security team had just come off about a 2-year strategic planning. And, you know, we have a clear vision for security, and the whole university community is coming along with us on this journey. And I think the level of trust started rising, right? So we have this vision of a community of us working together to do cybersecurity, and people loved it, and everybody was kind of feeling happy. We were in the middle of our implementation of that strategic plan, and the community, I think, was starting to feel empowered, and the security group was feeling like we're making headway in some of the things that we wanted to do. We had about 5 to 6 technical implementations that were on the way, anything from new firewall systems to vulnerability scanning and 2-factor authentication across the board. And we have deadlines that were a year out for a lot of these projects. And at the same time, we had just set up a new compliance unit on the security to formalize our compliance around things like HIPAA and FERPA and GDPR and all those fancy things that are coming at us right now. So it was sort of a normal security organization with high hopes for the future to secure our on-prem systems and few cloud-based systems that we have. Next slide, please. So then COVID happened, and sometime in March, we sort of made a decision to go remote. And that meant taking a campus that has been on-prem for, you know, as far back as mankind existed, I guess. And now we decided, hey, we need to go remote and we need to do it now. So some immediate challenges jumped out within the security group as well as within IT at large. Things around the team. How does a team work together no longer sitting in the same space? What does our security perimeter look like? The attack surface area just exploded. And the way we do security, the emphasis sort of changed almost overnight. we anticipated lots of errors from users, and then communication was a big challenge. So what I'm going to do is just spend a little bit of time talking about each of these challenges, how we mitigated them, and also what kinds of opportunities I see popping out of each one. So the team. So you have a picture of what the security groups, the group looked like. We had a small team that was embedded within the IT group. So we're all in the same building. You often don't set up meetings with IT people. You run next door and you talk to somebody in the hallway, and it's one big happy family. So now that we're remote, we are trying to figure out how do we maintain the same sort of setup. And so Teams, Microsoft Teams and Zoom and those various services quickly became our friend. And we started having these kinds of virtual meetings on a daily basis. And we must have set up 100 different channels now in Microsoft Teams to hang out with different people and get our work done. Within the security group itself, we have daily stand-up meetings. And the funny thing is we were actually planning to move out of the building that we were in. So this is something that we're planning to do from our remote building anyway. So this kind of gave us a leg up compared to some of our other IT colleagues who weren't prepared for that. But we started having virtual meetings. Everybody get together each morning and talk about what we did the previous day, what the plans are for the next day. And that seems to be working out really well. Nobody expressed that they are tired of it yet. So I think it's going well. One thing that came into view real quickly is that all of our strategic activities that we had planned, we had some big picture things that we were working on to reshape what security looked like. We had to sort of table those for a while and focus mainly on operational activities. Because as you can imagine, with the team going remote and the organization going remote, lots of things are happening that we have to put out lots of fires. And so my team was broken up into folks who are more strategic and some who are more operational. And we basically said, listen, everybody's operational now. Let's focus on putting out the fires and keep the trains running. We'll get back to our strategic things a little bit later on. One of my beliefs in one of these sort of disaster emergency situations is, can we find opportunities to fall forward, right? So instead of us kind of feeling like, oh, woe is me, we're doing less than we were capable of doing before. I'm looking for opportunities to say, can we do what we're doing now better? Like, can I leverage COVID to do things better than we're doing it before? And so what I see happening is that our daily interactions are improving. There's a lot more collaboration going on among people that even sat in the same physical space. For some reason, when you're on these virtual channels, it seems like people want to collaborate a little bit more. So that's a glass half full moment for me, and I'm relishing in that. Next slide, please. So challenge number 2, I think everybody can appreciate this one. Our security perimeter has changed drastically over a short period of time. So again, as I said, we are primarily an on-premise organization. We do have some things out in the cloud and in Microsoft Azure and some other places, but predominantly we're an on-premise organization. And so in order to get our folks to work remotely, in order for us to teach remotely and to do research remotely, we suddenly have to extend our networks from our data centers and from the comfort of campus to the internet. And we had to do that fast. We have a university health center, and we do a lot of human subject research. And so we had to quickly shift our on-prem research labs to become virtual labs. We had to quickly scale up in telehealth for our students and others who visit the health center and some of the services that we have on site. So it was actually a pretty good thing when the federal government announced that they were sort of lightening up on HIPAA controls a little bit. So we had more liberty to do some things that we wouldn't normally do under normal circumstances. But that part of the perimeter also now extend to beyond campus And of course, that gives me extra gray hairs and keep me up at night a little bit more. We are leveraging cloud services at a rate that is 1,000 times what it would be under normal circumstances. So just to give you an example, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, we have implemented Zoom campus-wide, Dropbox. We're doing a lot more things with virtual desktops, and we're doing a lot more with Office 365. So just imagine a campus of, anywhere between 20, 30,000 people, depending on who you're counting, suddenly learn that, okay, this is the tool you're gonna have to use to teach, or this is the tool you're gonna have to use to do research. And with that comes training and all the logistics behind that. And so lots of security challenges are starting to emerge. Everything that we sort of anticipated, just the fact that our networking, our security tools that we used to use to manage our environment, they all assume that campus was safe and the rest of the world was bad. Now with the population shifting to remote, we have to kind of focus on resetting our tools to say, is it okay for somebody to be logging on to VPN at wee hours of the night from random places? And the answer is now yes. It's harder to kind of use our statistical analysis that we used to do before and identify anomalies, because the whole thing just got blown up, right? And all our users are now coming in from remote locations all over the world. So we have to start resetting some of our logic around what's bad and what's good. Obviously, as we're implementing these tools so quickly, new vulnerabilities are being introduced. Zoom bombing, of course, hit us a couple times so far. And, we all know what that is. Not a big deal really, but in the media, it looks like it's the worst thing since the fallen angel or something. But we are working now to shore up our use of those kinds of platforms and address whatever vulnerabilities come with those and put up the necessary guardrails. And we're doing all that on the fly, right? So we're fixing the plane as we fly it. Our faculty are doing their thing and we're in the background doing what we can to shore up security. There's lots of training going on, train-the-trainer programs. We're teaching IT people how to do some security things and then have them pass it on to their folks. We're training functional users so they can set things up right, and providing training for also instructors and others about proper use of tools and so on to prevent security issues. One of the things that we also have to do is recognize that when everybody shifted to home use, to home work, we had to allow personal devices to access certain things that we wouldn't allow before. And so we have to quickly provide guidance to tell people, hey, this is how you need to set up your personal machine if you're going to use it to access our systems. And because we just don't have the logistics in place to be able to say to everybody, here's a laptop, now go home and work. So we have to leverage whatever people have in some cases. But with all these challenges and everything that's going on, it's amazing to see the kind of innovation that's coming out of people and the level of customer engagement, just because we're sort of backed into a corner and we don't have a choice. So we're seeing significant innovation going on right now. And as the leadership team, we're just hoping we can figure out how to keep that rolling beyond COVID. So I mentioned the attack surface area. We are seeing, of course, major incremental increase in that. And again, what that means is things that we used to say, you can only access this from your University Oregon issued computer from your office. Now we have to open these things up. So firewalls are being changed. Things are being moved into the cloud to provide people with browser-based access as opposed to accessing from special buildings within special groups. And we do have some of those situations where you cannot access a part of our network unless you're in a certain building within a certain IP range. And so those things, we have to kind of blow those out of the water and change the way we're doing things there. A lot more services are now exposed. Privileged users, which is one of the groups that I worry the most about, they usually work in a certain way because they're in their offices, they can lock their doors. And so the things that they're used to doing for 20 years, just getting up and leaving their computer and their office is locked and they feel like they're in a security bubble. That's all changed now because they are working from home in their living room or wherever, and different people are passing by. And so we have to be impressing upon people to start thinking a little bit differently as they do privileged work from remote locations. When it comes to things like that question we're always trying to answer, where is my data? That we thought we had a good answer to that question. Now it's becoming almost impossible to answer, because even though we're putting certain guardrails in place to prevent people from downloading certain data to their, let's say, their personal machine using something like virtual desktops, it's sort of impossible to control some of it. And so that question becomes harder, and that's something we're going to have to address beyond COVID to see how we wrangle it back in. Obviously, we're increasing the scale of things like VPN. So we had VPN and all that in place before, but it was never built for all of campus coming in at the same time. And so we had to quickly ramp up our capacity around things like VPN so it can handle more people connecting simultaneously. Two-factor authentication was a project that was on the books. It was being implemented, and we had grand visions of having this completed by December this year, campus-wide. We have just cut that time to August because I'm worried now about us working remotely and what that means. And so more is being put into that project now. The good news, though, is that as the attack surface area increase, the customers love it because they can access things a little bit easier than they could before on premises. So, you know, that whole security principle of psychological acceptability, I think, is being increased. So that's one good piece about it, but still there are some challenges from the security side. Next slide, please. So number 4, this is the one that gives me heartburn a little bit, but it's understandable. We are focusing right now, what I tell my team almost every day is let's think access first and security second. Because the problem is people are already stressed out and they are being asked to use 5 different tools to do their work. And the last thing we want to do is have security be the biggest barrier in their way. And so we are trying our best to figure out how do we create that balance where we have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But at this point in time, how do we stress availability so that the good guys can get access, while at the same time we're doing what we can to stop the bad guys? So what we've done is sort of adopted a C's get degrees approach, where I'm like, I'm not looking for A+ in what we're doing. I'm looking to get people working in as secure as we can, but let's not try to go Fort Knox now because we need to get work done. So we're really focusing on what risk management really means, and compliance is kind of taking a backseat right now. I'm worried less about doing things in a compliant manner. I'm more worried about doing things with the minimum risk, so we can have the campus working. So as you know, our systems were not really optimized for remote work. And as a result of that, lots of our processes and tools have been changed in a short period of time to accommodate the remote work. So even something as simple as password expirations. Normally your password expire and people can easily reset their passwords when they're on-prem. When you're at home and you're probably not connected to VPN, it gets a little bit tricky for the average end user. And so we have to be making decisions around, okay, what do we do about password expiration frequency? What about syncing to Active Directory? Normally you sync to Active Directory within a certain time frame. And now, something like 30 days. And now we have to change that to say, okay, maybe we need to expand that a little bit because it's a little bit complex for people to understand. Two-factor authentication was an interesting one. Most people use their phone for their second factor, but there were some people who were adamant that they're only going to use their office phones. Well, that doesn't work too well right now with their office phones being in the office. And so we have to be working on ways to issue things like tokens that bypass codes that last a little bit longer. I don't want to pass around physical tokens now because it just looks like a COVID spreading process, and I don't want to get into that. So we're trying to avoid that as much as possible while we ramp up the security for two-factor authentication. So again, the big focus on this is just, let's do security that's good enough, and let's focus on risk management as opposed to compliance. And so far that seemed to be working well, and we're fingers crossed on this. Next slide, please. So number 5 is sort of goes without saying, user errors. Lots of user errors. We anticipated this was gonna happen because, you know, usually people take about 6 months to learn a new tool and do it well. And right now we're asking them to do it in 6 days. And so obviously lots of problems, things around Zoom that you're hearing about in the news, it's happening to us as well, because people, you'll put the right default settings on your Zoom client, but people change them around, and then bad guys get into their classes and start creating problems. We also have things around oversharing. So people are not really familiar with things like Office 365. How do you get them to understand about oversharing and privileges, and what exactly are they sending to somebody when they share a document? And then the isolation is really a problem for a number of users. Especially in the academic side, people used to run over to their IT guys and ask them for help, and now it's a problem going virtual. So emerging, the true community that we're trying to achieve from a security standpoint as part of that vision I showed you before, it's actually coming together well, because I think we don't have a choice now. Everybody's playing together nicely with security. I think people are listening more, and I'm trying to see if I can leverage that. So the last big challenge that we have is really communication. How do you communicate to a new remote workforce and keep it effective? The good news for us is that the university have a really mature incident management team. It's actually one of the best across higher education nationally. So we do a pretty good job of standing up our incident command, and all communication, all major communication run through that incident management team. And so that's been working really well, and people across the university sort of know where to go find truth, and that's important. There's an internal communication person embedded within the IT group, and all communication from IT, including security, goes through that person. And so we have a more streamlined approach to doing this thing, as opposed to ad hoc random communication. I put a link here to our going remote website, and we copied off of Harvard. I think Harvard had one similar to that, and we just borrowed their stuff. And that's where everybody go to figure out what to do now that they're working remotely. And then finally, we've been updating our InfoSec website to provide more information. So security is pretty center stage right now as it relates to communication. Everybody is listening to hear what security has to say. So we're trying to ride that wave as much as we can. And the next slide. So just in terms of key takeaways, you know, I think this is therapeutic for me to share kind of what's going on over these last few days. And that's something I'd highly recommend, just to kind of share your experiences with other folks about how COVID is changing the way you work. There are lots of challenges, but I haven't come across one challenge yet that wasn't mitigatable if you're thinking about it the right way. And so as a leader in security or anything else, I think the biggest challenge is just to get people to see things differently, as opposed to focus on the negatives, and with the ultimate goal of seeing if we can fall forward when this thing is all over. So that's everything I have here, dear Cara. I'll take any questions.
Awesome. I've got some for you. Can you talk about device encryption? This may be a question for the end. Kevin, I'm going to pause on that one. Leo, specifically, how did you resolve remote access for your IT employees? Was that VPN, log me in, etc.?
So the IT, we had a pretty robust VPN before COVID for the IT folks. However, most of them, as you know, most IT people have lots of computers, right? They have their regular laptop. They probably have some super admin desktop. And so in some cases, we allow them to take their super desktops home. and then they just connect to the VPN. So that problem was sort of solved before COVID. The problem was for the broader campus where we had a pretty limited amount of connections that VPN could tolerate, and we had to ramp that piece up. But for IT, that problem was already resolved before COVID.
One more specific to you, and then we'll move on to Tiffany. And you kind of alluded to this. Is the university still using Zoom? And then the second question, which is really fair, are security concerns serious in your opinion? And I can tell you from the TAO side, we actually have a sponsor who their organization will not let them present on Zoom at all. So given the fact that that's our platform, we either have to do Facebook Live or Teams or Google Hangout or something else. So that will affect our business. So I think the question is really like to you, like, what are the serious concerns and are you still using that from a business perspective?
Right. So Zoom, it's an interesting thing that's happening with Zoom. There's a big PR thing. It kind of reminds me of when Microsoft was dumped on all the time for security issues. The concerns are real. There are some things in Zoom that just make it easier for people to do things like Zoom bombing. However, I've not seen a company that's responsive to the issues. So as soon as something is popped up these days, Zoom seems to be on it. So most of my colleagues across higher education, we're currently at the point where we're saying we're continuing to use Zoom for instruction and for telehealth as well, because there's also a HIPAA compliant piece of Zoom that we're using. And across higher education, I haven't seen anybody that says they're dumping it yet. We're keeping an eye on what's going on, but we're all using Zoom. What we've done though is provide clear guidance to our instructors and others about how to control your meetings, right? How to do things like waiting rooms and not share the password with everybody. We disable their ability to include the password in the link, in the Zoom link. So somebody have to physically type in the password. Some of our instructors are also using monitors. So somebody like a teaching assistant to help them with their session. If somebody start going crazy, they shut them out of the event. So I think there are tools inside of Zoom to prevent most of the things that you hear reported in the news. But I mean, it's just their turn. They're in the spotlight and they have to figure out how to get themselves out of the problems that they're facing. One of the things I'm working on now is to see if we can find a proactive way to identify our users that are doing bad Zoom behaviors. So we're looking at the Zoom API to see, could we get certain logs out of it to see instructors who purposely turn off the security settings that we have, because we're a university, so we're not forcing anybody to run Zoom a certain way, but we give them a good set of default settings. So we're kind of monitoring to see, are people turning off those default settings and then getting themselves in trouble? And we'll use that data for some targeted training or something like that to get going. But yeah, for now we're moving right along with Zoom.
Awesome, thanks, Leo. All right, go into your participant and give Leo let's give Leo a virtual clapping. I have an app that makes the clapping noise that I've played on some of our TAO events, and apparently it's like really horrible for folks' ears, so I've been asked to not do that. I'm going to introduce Tiffany, but I'm going to add one thing to Leo's virtual clap. There we go. We have actually at TAO really taken advantage of the being able to mute people and turn folks' video off, particularly if the meeting quality gets bad. But we've had some folks that we did not want speaking, and so like midstream, we've turned them off, and jokingly today the comment was made that we're going to turn off their ability to register for our events. So there's some definite options there. Thank you for not destroying my ears. You're welcome, Andrew. My pleasure. All right, Tiffany, the screen is yours.
Hi, everyone. It sounds like I better behave or I won't get to come to future meetings. It's good that we are maintaining control, because I have been reading a little bit about the Zoom bombing stuff, and that is kind of scary, but I do think it kind of falls to you know, user error or misuse, I guess, more than anything. But I'm going to talk about multi-factor authentication. Hopefully, it's going to come across as it relates to kind of the last couple of speakers. With the way that things are changing, not all of us are or are familiar with what it's like to work remote. I've been a remote worker for the last 3 years, and it's, you know, second nature to me. The only adaptation I have to make is having my husband home all the time. So the house is not going to be as quiet as it has been. But let me pull up my slides because I'm running my own slides here.
Yes, and Tiffany, we've provided you the control to share, so we're not taking that away from you yet.
You just don't want to listen, just watch me talk in my office for 15 minutes, I promise. So here we go. It's gonna ask me to change my preferences here. All right, hold on just a second. I'm sorry, you guys. It's making me back out and jump back on.
I'll do filler, and we'll go ahead and go back to a question. She's disabling the Zoom just to stall for time. We'll let our speakers that are still out here. So wait, that's not the question. I read that. Can any of y'all talk about device encryption? Are any of you all using it? And this is a great question from Kevin. When like losing mobile devices with sensitive info, do any of you all currently have a policy where you can wipe somebody's device that's personal?
So I have, I don't have a policy, but I have some default things with Office 365 and people's phone where we could wipe somebody's device, but that's something that we'll never touch unless it's somebody coming to us asking us to do it. But just broadly on encryption, that's one of the things that we had to get for some of our admin users who went home with their devices. We had to get them to encrypt their hard drives. Because when it was locked in their office, it was less of a problem, but when they went home, we had to get them to do some encryption.
Cool. Before Tiffany starts, anybody on the Secureworks or CrowdStrike side? I know, I don't know if y'all have answers to that. But Andrew is sharing with us that, oh, there's my dog. Anyone with an Office 365 business email account on their phone can have their phone wiped. So that's the default. All right. So you all don't have to listen to that ear-piercing noise. Tiffany, the screen's yours again.
Awesome. Thank you. And I was worried if your dog was going to start barking that mine was going to join in a chorus. So he's right behind me. Okay, so yeah, multi-factor authentication as it relates to the evolving challenges of having a remote workforce. What does it mean to know who's connected? And what really is multi-factor authentication? I think we have a good mix of people in probably different roles here. I am not technical myself. I am in a sales role for the public sector team over at Yubico. So multi-factor authentication is something that we know and do well. But I think with a range of different experiences with multi-factor, I want to keep things kind of topical and focus on why multi-factor and what it is over how it works, because there are a lot of nuances. So my most important point is that protecting corporate and public sector assets in our environment is paramount, and having a strong, verifiable user authentication ensures that only known individuals, people that you want to allow, are going to have access to those assets. So it's not just about knowing who's connected, but it's also about enabling access, as Leo mentioned, especially with things being so haywire right now. Just being able to get through the day and use the applications essential to do your job or study or take a class, simple things that we need to maintain. So with that, there are still challenges that we do have to address, and most of those are created by the threats that we're all aware of, both old and evolving, with reference to like the Zoom bombing, for example. We still have to live our lives, but with regards to these sort of new scary things. So my answer, in short, and probably a number of other people who work in the identity space, is that the answer is multi-factor authentication. Because most breaches are the result of compromised credentials, if you had multi-factor authentication in front of most things, the risk would be dramatically reduced. So we'll talk a little bit about what is multi-factor, how do we define it, what are different flavors of multi-factor authentication, how does encryption play into that, and what is Fido authentication? So what are the standards of authentication and sort of the top of the standard, and where are those coming from? And with that in mind, what's next? If we know the better option, how do we facilitate that and move forward? And this is kind of a deeper iteration of the slide that I just showed. So identifying the challenges, I thought this was kind of interesting and also really relevant to the space that I'm in, and a number of you being in the public sector space as well. Telework.gov at the OPM website highlights that only 21% of the government's own workforce is telework eligible. And we're defining that as someone who works only 1 to 2 at the minimum and up to 3 to 5 days over a 2-week period, which is not very much. And 49% of that eligible 21% would be prepared and ready to transition to fully remote work now. So that's kind of a scary percentage, considering how small a sliver of our government that is. And I think that those numbers are probably somewhat fairly reflected in private sector as well. So some of the logistical components are, with all of us going remote, we're teleworking, we're engaging with our teams the way that we're having this event right now. We're talking to each other over video, we're using new applications, O365, more things are going into the cloud, using different workstations. So somebody who would have gone on campus and used their desktop is now working with a laptop at home possibly. And it's the same thing, you know, for government workers as well. We're probably going to see more BYOD, so phones and that sort of thing instead of a desk phone. Creating a culture of security too around that. So utilizing these things with the mindset of maintaining security both for the individual and the organization. Things like eliminating user error. So passwords are an example of what can be a problem there. And then again, maintaining the sense of community. So utilizing apps like Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting, Hangouts, BlueJeans, all these different things are kind of a necessary. The next is security perimeter. If you ask anybody who works in identity, we would say identity is the new perimeter because you can kind of put it in front of everything, and you probably should be. So I'm talking about that more as it relates to these items in number 4. For the attack surface area, we're talking about different threats. I'll get more into those in just a minute. And so for those items with the security perimeter, those other tools or items that we're employing, we'll talk a little bit about VPN, 2FA, and I'm using that term because there is a slight difference between 2FA and MFA, although in the grand scheme of things, depending on how you look at it, it may not matter. So privileged users, we'll just really lightly touch on that. And then sensitive work and maintaining compliance for government, healthcare, and university, that's super important. So pretty simple, the threats that we're seeing and talking about mostly in the news and everywhere else. Phishing, malware as it relates to phishing, ransomware as it relates to phishing, man-in-the-middle attacks we see all the time, and obviously we can relate these to how we could possibly protect ourselves with multi-factor. So we'll start with the phishing because that's kind of in front of everything. The number 1 attack to steal passwords is phishing. So how are passwords stolen and accounts taken over? It's done through phishing for credentials. This is the most widely used attack method for stealing passwords, and the stats are eye-opening. according to Google, the most believed phishing pages trick users 45% of the time. That makes you wonder, as savvy as you may be, how many times have you been tricked? Possibly, if your company isn't using security awareness training of some kind and you aren't being phished by your organization, how do you know you've been phished? Until maybe something happens. Even more confounding, the users are tricked 3% of the time by really obvious attempts, obvious pages, or misspelled links and domains. And then out of the people who were tricked once, we see about 15% are falling for it again within the next year. So one thing to keep in mind too is that everyone does get phished. It's not just the privileged users, the IT admins, and people with intent to get to the C-level folks. Everybody is a person of interest within the organization, because attackers are looking for any and all credentials they can steal, because they're looking for any way that they can get in. Because attackers will often get a foothold in the organization, that they know how to get where they're going once they get in. A common method is to install malware within the account that was taken over, and then have the malware continue to gather information about the network and other employees, and then look for ways to steal additional credentials. So possibly using the compromised account to attack a privileged user. So that's attack from the inside almost. The goal is for the attacker to elevate their privileges at that point. So as I mentioned early on, the #1 security problem is stolen credentials. We look at globally about $600 billion on an annual basis that are spent on either repairing issues with IT fraud, or on different kinds of tools to hopefully mitigate it. And with the gross majority of those things being the result of stolen credentials, surprisingly, only 10% of the IT security spend is on MFA. So what that means is people aren't really buying or using MFA to the extent that they should be. And then the other scary figure that's just kind of floating out there is about 200 days go by before we detect a breach. So somebody's possibly in our network, moving around, collecting additional credentials and sensitive information for a really long time. So this is another one that I liked because it just kind of shows you the route. If you have never seen this before, I think a lot of us who work in security have seen a slide similar to this several times, but it's nice because it kind of walks you through what a possible chain looks like for an attack to take place. So with that in mind, we know multi-factor authentication is kind of a necessary. And to that point, passwords alone are insufficient. And it'll make a little bit more sense as we get further into this as to why a password alone is insufficient. If it's not already clear from a user experience standpoint, if no one's ever had their password need to be reset, not just from losing it, but from possibly having a compromised account. So we define multi-factor authentication by these three things: something you have, something you know, and something you are. And these examples would be, I have something like a security token, a fob, a card, anything like that for this general definition. Something you know, preferably a PIN. And something that you are refers to like a biometric component. So whether it's like an actual biometric, like a fingerprint, or even just like a physical behavioral biometric, or something that you, like on our case, for example, you push down on them to indicate that you're there physically with a token. And then the types of multi-factor authentication are looked at in these four categories, generally speaking. Text message or phone push notifications, one-time passwords that are generated, smart card like PIV or CAC that are used throughout the government and defense within our country, and then Fido, so Fido tokens or Fido authentication. So what's the difference between these four kinds of multi-factor authentication? The inherent difference is essentially the differences between the symmetric and asymmetric encryption associated with these. So text or push notification and one-time password is symmetric encryption, and then smart card and Fido require asymmetric encryption. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I really like this slide because it does a pretty good job of explaining the difference in just pictures. So basic username and password with the authentication scheme works, and this will show where the risk is. With the basic authentication, the user remembers the password, and some form of that password is also kept on a server. So I know my password, and some piece of it is stored over here. It doesn't really matter that it's encrypted on the server because it's still stored on the authentication server to provide authentication verification, and there's still an inherent risk there. This back-end side of the system is what has been stolen in numerous incidents, and once it's stolen, the hackers then have the entire repository of usernames and passwords, which they can then use to impersonate anyone in the organization. So it's buy one, get many if you're able to get in. For example, I think of the RSA breach that occurred in 2011, where the backend was compromised and then all of the tokens became vulnerable. So here's how public key crypto solves the problem. Down here you see the secret or the private key is kept with the user, and the private key is not kept on the server. So instead, the user's corresponding public key is kept on the server. Even if an attacker gains access and steals all of the public keys, those aren't useful for them or impersonating access because the private key is required, which the attackers cannot get en masse. Public key requires keeping the private key private. The public key can be openly distributed without compromising security. So furthermore, the private key is never exposed. Rather, a computation is performed to validate the private key to public key match. And I provide some sources for this at the end of the presentation. This is another graphic that I really like that kind of indicates the way that it works with public key cryptography. It just kind of walks you through with the arrows. And so I mentioned Fido authentication earlier, and I'm curious to know how many people are familiar with the term Fido or Fido U2F, Universal Two-Factor, or Fido 2.
If you can do the yes, if you can do the yes in your participant code, in your participant chat, then we can see that.
Oh, I can't. Okay, let's see here. I typically don't use Zoom. I was on a call the other day with a county in California, and I was scolded for even alluding to it. So
if you're familiar with whatever Tiffany just said, because I don't know what she said, so I'll put a no. We got 6 no's so far. So Tiffany, what was the question?
Cool. Okay, are you familiar with what Fido authentication is? I'm not sure how many people here deal with MFA in first person. I'm sure Leo is well familiar. But if you're not overseeing like authentication, or you're on the identity team, or access management, maybe this is not familiar to everybody. So Fido essentially is a standard, but it relates to what I just showed you with the asymmetric cryptography, in that it's the fundamental protocol. Sorry, I just had something pop up in my poll here. It's the fundamental protocol used in all versions of Fido. So Fido takes this into account. And Fido authentication itself is composed of a couple of different pieces, as you see here. So CTAP and WebAuthn. And web authentication, Fido authentication itself is composed of an API hosted by the W3C, or World Wide Web Consortium, and a client to authenticator protocol, which is the CTAP, which is hosted by the Fido Alliance, which is over here on this side. So the key concepts are that authenticators generate and store credentials. Communication with client applications is defined by the CTAP, and client applications that could be a web app or a native app can register credentials and log into a FIDO2 server. This communicate is defined by the web authentication API. And this next slide's kind of similar, but again, it's just another kind of good way to demonstrate what I just said, but with a little bit better graphic. So FIDO2 essentially is the combination of CTAP and WebAuthn. So they're just a set of open standards utilizing public key cryptography to enable strong first factor authentication and multi-factor. So we mentioned smart card earlier, and the reason I'm not going super deep into what smart cards are is that it's not applicable to everyone. It's very applicable in the government space. I talk to people on a daily basis who wish that they could replace their PIV cards. We're talking to all agencies who have PIV and CAC and are interested in having some kind of additional authentication that doesn't have the same complexity. They're pretty expensive, and you have to issue new ones, and they're sometimes not eligible for people living outside the United States. So also to scale, it's not as easy to provide them to everyone as much as you would like to. So just essentially they're expensive, more complex to issue, and they're difficult to scale, and necessary though for certain organizations. So to kind of summarize, we've moved through addressing these sort of various security challenges and mitigating possible threats over the last half of the century, starting with passwords. So it was invented by Fernando Corbato, who worked at MIT, and when interviewed a few years ago in 2014, he is now 87 years old, and said that he felt that it had become kind of a nightmare, and that sending any type of critical information to another server, such as a password, makes it susceptible to hackers. So it's straight from the man who created them, not secure. Later on, we moved to the Rsa Fob. Many of us have had these. If you work for a security organization or anywhere that has access to sensitive information, you may have had to have these if you couldn't use your phone for a push notification. Or if, say, you lose your phone, you're issued a temporary one of these, and that, they worked fine to our knowledge until we realized that they were not. So one-time password, still very hackable. Then we moved to a software token. Lots of us have used like SecureAuth or Duo, allowed ourselves to authenticate into things with just a tap on our phone. It's convenient, but still there's some inherent risk there. And so that's why the Fido U2F guidelines or protocols were established a few years ago. So we actually helped Google to create those standards, but we're not the only ones who do it. There are a lot of different options that are essentially Fido tokens. So there's, a plethora of different examples out there. And then we move forward in the last year through, present time with the later iteration, which is Fido2 with the WebAuthn piece. So that kind of brings us to present point. Something simpler and more secure than a collection of other things that you have to do and having to constantly reset your passwords. Something that's scalable is what's needed, especially with remote workers. There could possibly be some concern around issuing like a physical token or device for authentication. What if I lose it? What about spread a pathogen with physically touching and distributing something like this? Those are all valid concerns. And I think with the mindset of addressing the challenges that we have in front of us right now, most companies are looking to solve those issues and actively making changes that will circumnavigate those scaries, those risks. So how these things are provisioned and provided to employees and students and workers, those are all being handled with regard to COVID.
Hey, Tiffany, I'm going to pause for a second because we have somebody that's following our rules of engagement really well, and we have a raised hand, and Dennis Miller has a question that's relevant to the flow of the presentation. So Dennis, thank you. We're going to unmute you and let you ask Tiffany your question.
Hi, Dennis. I hope I can answer. Don't forget I said I'm not technical at the beginning.
We're getting the unmuting going. Dennis, you should be good to go. I see you unmuted, so I don't know if maybe your volume isn't turned up or your microphone isn't turned on your computer. Or maybe you raised your hand and then walked away. Okay, we'll pause and see if Dennis comes back.
Okay, maybe he didn't mean to.
Maybe his hand is down and he's muted again. Sorry for putting you on the spot, Dennis.
You can message me too if you have a question and don't want to ask. I can obviously get it answered, even if it's not in right now. Yeah, so we need something more simple and more scalable, a more modern version to protect our sensitive applications. And I want to touch on like the VPN conversation earlier too. I think I kind of moved through that a little bit quickly, but things like VPNs are important. You know, we want to have, let's see, sorry, I'm just looking at my slide here to make sure I don't leave anything out. So things like privileged access and VPNs are really important, but we also look at like the least, the zero trust model, so least privilege access, and something like a VPN, if somebody needs to be connected to the network, that's great. But in general, it's cumbersome, it's expensive, it's bulky in terms of infrastructure. So we look at it as if somebody doesn't need to VPN in, why interfere with their ability to do things normally, like on a personal device, for example, like being able to go back and forth between checking personal email and work or school email and things like that, when really you could just verify them in front of the things that they want to access. And we also think about questions like, where is my data? Where are my critical informations? And that also asks the question, who's had access to it and when, and who has access to it now. And so controlling those things, something like a multi-factor in conjunction with a privileged access management solution, which is separate from what I do, but those things enable pretty granular control over who has access to what and continued access for people who need it to the applications and things that are necessary to whatever they're trying to do, whether it's get through a term in school or, you know, service a healthcare patient or government worker, for example. So I hope I'm not leaving anything out. I feel like I went through this pretty quickly. But I do want to recap. So we have a host of new challenges that are bringing about new security concerns by having everybody being remote. Some of us are more used to being remote than others, so it's going to take kind of a learning curve. Many or most of the risks that we're concerned with are related to breaches that are typically caused by compromised credentials in one fashion or another. We obviously want to stop attackers once they're in the environment, but it would be better to stop them at the door if we could. The most effective way to address, again, is with MFA. And then to reiterate, not all forms of multi-factor authentication are the same. While there are several brands or choices for each type of authentication, Fido tokens and smart cards are, generally speaking, the superior method of authentication. So not only are they safer, but Fido tokens generally provide a more user-friendly experience to all user groups. So I realize I covered a lot of this information at pretty high level. So I have this list of resources and I can post this somewhere or share it out if this is interesting or useful. This is some of the stuff that we've done with Google and for Fido and Fido 2. And then also this is just some general stuff. So we have like a developer page, but it's not really just about us at all. There's the authentication standards themselves. I included the OPM link. Also the data breach investigations report, which is the Verizon data breach report that everybody talks about, that refers to the 80% of breaches occurring as a result of compromised credentials. So that's pretty well known. Anyone who worked at Symantec has heard that. And then the someone I know and used to work with had an interview with the IoT Security Services Association, and he talks about essentially if you could do any one thing to protect your environment, it would be to turn on your MFA. So with that being said, thank you. Please let me know if anybody has questions. I can put something together after the fact if anyone wants some more resources or anything.
Awesome. Let's give Tiffany the clap. Oh, I see. Gosh, y'all are not, that sounded awful. We're not going to give you the clap. That was a terrible, terrible Zoom statement that I just made. And I am embarrassed. And now I've embarrassed other people, and I should not be allowed to drink wine at 7 p.m. and be on Zoom calls. So let that be a lesson to you. I really hope somebody puts that and it goes virtual like the guy, or viral. Oh my God, I'm done. Everyone,
That's good.
thanks. I appreciate that. Use their waving hands to clap for Tiffany. And we are really close to 7 o'clock. We generally do these meetings for 2 hours. So we're going to ask everyone to hang with us, and everyone seems to be. So grab another drink, and I'll keep doing comedy hour. But we have a question from John Stone with his raised hand. And John, you're unmuted. Would you like to try and save me from myself?
I think that may be too late, but but yeah, my question. I got introduced to the YubiKeys about a year ago, probably, and it may have been 2 years. Wow, time flies. And at that time, there just wasn't that many sites that allowed you to utilize it. There were some password managers and things like that. I mean, one of the strongest things that they talk about utilizing it for would be for your online banking, for example, but hardly any of the online banking solutions at the time utilize Fido. So, I mean, how is the adoption of Fido doing at this point? It just seems that until the sites actually use it, it's not all that useful.
So to be completely fair and upfront, I didn't really want to make this all about Yubico because there are other Fido tokens, right? But I am really glad you asked, because the adoption of the protocol itself matters. And I'll tell you this, how long ago was it that you were looking at it in conjunction with banking?
I think it was probably about 2 years this time, March.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will say I am in public sector, so most of my interactions are with like federal government agencies. I would be surprised, and I'm happy to follow up with like a confirmed answer, yes or no, about the banking, but I would be surprised if it isn't now, because you can put it in front of almost any social media. Like, I mean, we're using it with Facebook, like pretty much they just have to enable us to work with them. You know, like LastPass, 1Password, gosh,
Yeah,
anything.
most of the 2FAs I'm seeing so far, at least with my banking systems, are all just set up for going to your email or to your phone.
So okay, with that, I used to work at Secureworks, and like what you think is like native, like whatever their multi-factor is that they're offering from you, is just rebranded like Secureworks, like step up on multi-factor, right? So I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't have it installed in front of my own banking. So I have to get that answer for you.
Okay.
I will tell you this though, every major government agency at the highest level is, most of them, several of them are in conversations with us now because of the COVID situation. I obviously can't talk about any specifics, but yeah, everybody's talking to us right now.
Is there any? Well, then this brings up another question, and is because I do see the value, especially for your personal security. Is there anything that you can do to implement it as a front end on your side that where, I don't know. I'm really not sure what I'm thinking. I mean, basically, I'm saying is it would happen to be the Yubico, but it's like you got multiple different vendors out there with the keys, and that utilize the Fido standard, but it just doesn't seem to be any utilization for them yet at this point.
Okay, so you're asking about the difference between other like Fido tokens and ours.
Well, I don't know if it's even yours. I'm just saying in general, where when you have the token, this hardware token, I haven't seen a whole lot of use that any sites I can go to that utilize it, unless what would I do in order to implement it on my own, I guess, if there's a way to do it.
I see what you're saying. So like there's a walkthrough that for you to install it on your own device. Like on my first day of employment, I went down to Palo Alto and sat in the office, and like they walked me through it, and it's pretty easy. And anyone who's more technical than I am could probably read through the instructions and do it. I've sent a few to people that I know like in industry, and they've installed them themselves without a problem, but like it depends on how you use it. So I actually have.
So you can secure you can secure your device, but you can't really necessarily secure your connections unless the
You can put it in
connector.
front of anything, like in front of a VPN, in front of applications. Like you
Oh,
can,
really?
yeah, you can like require it in order to log into your Facebook account. And like, so this is like what they are. And this isn't just us again, right? This is, you can have different tokens, but like ours, for example, has like a near field communication component where if I want to log into Facebook or something else on my phone, like I can tap, anything, tap the back of my phone, my Gmail account, Google Suite, and do it that way. And like we have them for ones that we leave, like I have one mini one that I leave in my Mac all the time. And it essentially executes the PIN for me and enters it. So
Okay. Okay. I see what you're
does that
saying.
answer the question?
I think so. I mean, basically what you're saying is you can do some setup with software on your individual system, or
Yeah.
maybe on your phone. There's probably a phone app too, and then make it a front end that you won't allow you to connect somewhere unless you tap the key or have the key.
So if I understand, you're asking more about like personal use case for setting
Yeah.
up a multi-factor token.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you can because I have it set up for myself, but I've been walked through. I can send you like a document that talks
Okay.
about that, and it's
That'd
not
be
going to
great.
be specific to us. I'm sure other companies do it similarly. So.
I figured that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I
Okay.
hope I helped.
Thanks. Bye. Or
John, thank you. I
Hey,
appreciate
by the way, group chat has been turned off.
What? Why is, oh, wait, hold on. I shouldn't touch anything. I'm not really sure why that's happening.
So is this like, do we have this organized so we like hang out after? Is this like doing our normal meetup?
I can't hang out after, but I'll let somebody else on our team figure out what's going on. And we will.
Tiffany, are you bored?
No, I wish I had the time to be, but I did go to a Mac user group meetup online the other day, and this is like, I've been so busy with work, I haven't done social stuff online like this. So I'm like, oh my gosh, people are doing like meetups still. Industry.
Yeah, we're having lots of meetups, lots of virtual beer parties and stuff like that, and especially Friday evenings. So.
Well, I'm turning on, I've got to go be super strong moderator. Virtual clap for Tiffany, or virtual applause. I think we should go with the word applause. Chat's been re-enabled. I might have done that by myself because I was so embarrassed during the whole applause comment. So Tiffany, thank you. We still have Jeffrey Carpenter. And let's transition over to him because we want to be sensitive to folks' time. And please know that any question you put in the chat, we will download, and we can also use for different conversations and some feedback to ISSA for things that people may want to learn. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you this evening. I'm Jeff Carpenter. I lead our incident response consulting practice at Secureworks. I've been at Secureworks for about 5 years. Prior to coming to Secureworks, I worked for a couple of years as a product security officer at Royal Philips doing product security for medical devices. And then before that, I spent 20 years at the CERT Coordination Center, the first incident response team. There I managed incident analysis, vulnerability discovery and remediation, malicious code analysis, network traffic analysis, secure coding, and helping countries create national level response teams. And in my spare time, I'm also a volunteer firefighter. We learn a lot from the fire service to help inform incident response. So I wanted to focus on incident response tonight, specifically with respect to COVID, and talk about some of the strategic risks that we face that have an impact on incident response. Talk about specific response problems that we have because of the virus, and then talk about some of the mitigations. Fortunately, a number of the previous presenters talked about some of the issues that I had, so I will focus primarily on the issues that haven't yet been raised tonight. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So starting with strategic risks, I'm going to focus on the three bottom ones because those are the ones I think really haven't been addressed by our previous speakers. And I just wanted to add before I start focusing on these, building on what Christian was talking about earlier, But we are seeing maybe a slight increase in activity, not a significant increase. The adversaries are very nimble and able to change their tactics quickly based on their perceptions of where they can be most effective. So if they think that there's something related to COVID, even in both manipulating the infrastructure that's changed or manipulating the people based on what they're facing, they're going to change their tactics to do that. So all of the risks that we're facing can be associated with the adversaries changing their tactics to try to take advantage of the situation that we're in. And if you listen to what Leo was talking about and summed up kind of the totality of what he was saying, I think you can conclude we've had the biggest IT transformation in history in a week. Lots over the past 25 years that I've been in IT and security, I've seen lots of transformations. No transformation like this has occurred in a 1 week period. So it's going to have a ripple effect in us from a security perspective as we try to reorient ourselves to this new way of doing business. Both our security teams managing security as well as our incident response folks having to learn how to respond to this. So focusing on these strategic risks and looking at the bottom three, signal to noise for security teams. So if you're a security team, you have analysts come to work every day, perform a certain set of functions where they're looking for problems on the network, looking for adversarial activity. You get into a battle rhythm of doing that, what you do from day to day. Of course, the tactics of the adversaries change, what the adversaries are doing change, but you get into a battle rhythm. That has been totally upended by the changes in the infrastructure. So we have to go through a period of not only changing what we're doing to look for problems, but figuring out where's the best place for me to put my time. I may have known 2 months ago, 3 months ago, what the best things for me to do to spend my effort, because we're all resource constrained. We don't have enough resources to do everything, so we have to prioritize. How do I know what to prioritize today? Because the world has changed so dramatically. Budgetary uncertainty is another large factor that we're seeing organizations face. Organizations, many are fighting for their survival. Is the organization even going to exist weeks from now? When you're in that state, security isn't as much a priority. Spending on security solutions is as much a priority. Spending on security staff may not be as much of a priority. And so that's a big challenge for us in security. You know, a couple of years ago, a CISO used to be able to walk into a C-level organization and get a big paycheck. You know, after Target, you could walk in, not a big paycheck, get a check to buy security solutions. Can't do that today. You can't walk in and get maybe even a penny today with the environment we're in. How long that's going to last, we don't know the answer to that. And then finally, employee availability. If your security team has people that are affected by the virus, either themselves or their family members, and they're not available, that can have a significant impact on your ability to manage security in your enterprise if you don't have the people that you need to help you perform that function. You can go to the next slide, please. Now, if we look at risks to the actual incident response process, the first thing that I'd like to note is I've worked with a lot of organizations on creating an incident response plan and testing that plan. Very few of them have tested a plan in conjunction with some other major emergency happening at the same time. So this from an IR perspective, when you look at an incident response, performing an incident response activity, this is like having a hurricane go through, followed a day later by an earthquake. And so you've got two major disasters potentially happening at the same time? Does your organization have enough bandwidth to deal with 2 disasters at the same time? Can you deal with the COVID disaster and the security problem at the same time? Does your IR plan take into consideration that key components of that plan may not be able to be performed because of the other disaster that's occurring? So, for example, I've seen IR plans that say, all the participants from legal, HR, whatever, are going to meet in the war room, and we're going to have a daily meeting in the war room. You're not going to meet in the war room now because no one's going to be there. So it's important to look at plans and make sure that plans still can be implemented as they are, as they're written, or make changes so they can be written, and understand that you may have to be managing more than one disaster at the same time. Second is access issues. Can you find the resources that you need? For example, if you have a computer that is suspected of being involved in an incident, can you find that computer now? All the computers used to be in the office. Now they may be in people's homes. They may be somewhere else. How do you get to that computer? Even if it is in the office, can your employee, if you actually need to get to it, can actually get into the building to get to it? And if they can get to it, do they have a place that they can take it to do the analysis? So there's lots of access related issues as well. Behaviors, things that used to be behaviors that you knew were going to be bad behaviors, and things that would be good behaviors may be completely reversed today. It may be the activities that you used to be able to flag as being bad, and Leo kind of alluded to this, are now behaviors that are to be expected. So a lot of your decision-making process as an incident responder, as you're going through an incident, trying to understand what may have happened, incident responders gain a sense to quickly make decisions about what is logical, what may have happened, how it may have happened. A lot of those assumptions that maybe base assumptions you used to make may not be valid anymore. So it's going to take more validation as you're going through an incident. Resource availability. Do you have people available? Are your incident responders available, not sick, able to respond to the locations you need them to respond? What if you actually do have to have someone physically go to a facility to obtain access to a machine, but you don't have any employees who are willing to travel to the location? So that availability of your people may be an issue. Contracts and partners. If you rely on external partners or contractors to help you perform functions, well, first, is the company still in business today? Are they still operating? If they are operating, are they operating as your contract states they should be operating? It's certainly worth doing outreach to your contracted providers and partners to make sure that they are still available, that they are still able to provide service if you need it. And then this was touched on by some other folks, the collaboration. How does your team collaborate? How do your incident responders who are working on an incident collaborate with each other if they are not physically located in the same location? Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? All right, some of the mitigations. Employee training is really a key factor, and that was touched on by some of the folks previously. Employees, again, because this change happened so fast, the employees are trying to orient how should I be doing my job. They may not always use the resources that you want them to use. They may be trying to find resources that you wouldn't want them to use, but they think are useful to them. So making sure you're providing guidance to your employees to help them figure out, how can I do my job effectively while I'm not in the office? What is acceptable to you? Is Zoom acceptable for me to use or not acceptable for me to use? Should I be using Teams? Should I be using something else? So providing them training on what it is that's acceptable to use, as well as training, reminding them that they are potential targets of activity Certainly they were targets of activity before, but specifically looking out for things that we know the adversaries are doing relating to this particular virus, phishing and those types of attacks. Vulnerability scanning is you have new components of your infrastructure which have just been built in the past couple of weeks, ensuring that you're looking for vulnerabilities in that new infrastructure. We talked with Tiffany, talked a lot about multi-factor authentication, so I won't go into that in depth. Endpoint network monitoring. As your endpoints have all now left the enterprise and are dispersed outside, do you have the appropriate visibility of those to understand what's happening on those machines? The fight today, for the most part, is being conducted on the endpoints. And so do you have visibility of those endpoints where your data may be, where your employees are working with that data? Can you see what's happening on those endpoints? Remote conference guidelines, are they using the right technology? Have they configured it correctly so that it's not configured insecurely? And finally, effective use of threat intelligence. So you know, as the adversaries are changing their tactics, how might that impact your security? Next slide, please. So from an incident response perspective, some of the mitigations, review your IR plans, make sure that they're realistic in this environment, make sure that the processes that you have in those plans for how you operate during an incident can still be conducted as described in this new environment where everyone's remote, and obviously, if not, make changes to those plans. Ensure you have a way to perform IR functions. Can your IR people, can responders have access to all the tools that they need to perform their functions? How do you gain physical access to the machines? How do you gain virtual access to machines if you can't gain physical access to them? Are the systems that you need to perform IR available to the incident responders? Conduct an exercise. It sounds kind of silly to try and do an exercise now, but I think you're going to have learned a lot over the past couple of weeks on things that are and aren't working, and have to make changes to your incident response plan. And my observation over many years of helping organizations with incident response plans is you never get it right the first time. And usually when you make changes in an emergency, there's a high chance you're going to do something wrong. So sometime in the next couple of weeks would be a good time to do a short exercise just to test the plan and make sure that the changes you've made to the plan for this environment actually can work. Employees have, can come used to having an informal support network or a formal support network that if something weird's happening, to raise the alarm to the appropriate security people, to take a look at it, or ask somebody else, do you think this is odd? That whole support structure may be completely upended by this. So it's a good time to reinforce to your employees, if you see something wrong, if you see something that's odd, this is how you should report it to us so that we can take a look at it. And they need to have some way that they don't just not say anything to anyone because they don't have someone sitting next to them anymore. Have a way to keep your people alert on the different scams that are occurring, and do phish testing to see if your folks are learning from your education campaign. And then finally, ensuring that for your remote workforce solutions, as you're introducing them, making sure you're providing as much guidance to them about the secure way to use those facilities as you can. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, check and update your incident response plans. Make sure you have a program to educate your workforce plan to test and exercise your response plan changes that you're likely to have to make in response to this, and then review and specify new technology solutions. And that's it. Thank you. Good luck.
Awesome. So we have a lot of things going on in the chat, including can we get GIFs inloaded and whatnot. I'm going to say to Sean, my vote, Jeff, best dressed presenter.
Rockstar. This is not my normal home attire.
Rockstar, thanks for staying away with us. I'm going to add before I ask you a question, because I do have one. I also think you have the best office presentation. Like it's really nice, and the flowers in particular are a lovely touch. So our question is, how will IR change given the massive shift from on-prem to cloud?
Yeah, interesting. I have a kind of not necessarily a standard view for that question. So from a core incident responder perspective, conceptually, almost everything is the same in the cloud in response as it is in the physical world, with the primary exception being access to the infrastructure, where the corollary in the physical world is you actually walk in a machine room and you physically have a machine sitting there. You obviously don't have that in the cloud, but you have the management consoles for cloud. That part is very different. But conceptually, getting logs, analyzing logs, getting a disk image, analyzing a disk image, obtaining malware from a machine, analyzing malware, those are all conceptually the same. The actual process might differ slightly between cloud and on-premise equipment, but conceptually they're the same. And so if you have someone who's a good incident responder in the physical world, they probably can very easily be taught to be a reasonably good incident responder in the cloud world. Now, that's from an incident responder perspective. Now that though assumes that you have logging set up correctly, that you have the right monitoring on the machine. So most of the cloud providers don't provide 100% of the security that needs to be provided. You are responsible for monitoring, for logging, ensuring that you're collecting the right data. If those have not been set up properly, then an incident responder is going to have a hard time being as effective as you would want them to be. It can potentially have the same problem on a physical computer. We run into computers all the time that have not been configured correctly, don't have the logs, don't have monitoring on them, and it can be hard to piece together what has actually what's actually happened and quickly find things.
Thanks, Jeff. I would also like to read and state that this is the latest Zoom I've been on. It's the only one where folks have picked up growlers, and we know they are drinking. And so Andrew's just, don't show us what you're wearing from the waist down, please, comment. Quite funny. And what I appreciate about this crowd is that you've literally really given me the feeling of an in-person event from start to finish, where everyone has had a drink or two and feels better about what they say and more comfortable. So we'll try our good language. We're going to try and get everybody out of here. Please give Jeff some applause. I see it's going in there already. So thank you.
I can just add one thing. The only thing that's a disadvantage to me on this virtual meeting is I've never been to Oregon. I'd love to come for a visit, but unfortunately I didn't get that out of this meeting.
Where are you presenting to us?
Providence, Rhode Island.
Wow, it's really late for you. That is awesome. Extra round of applause. And Harry, I think that I'm going to read it because I started it. Should we give Jeff the clap? And apparently the answer yes. And we're still here. People love Rhode Island. Thank you all. Thank you to all of our presenters. Seriously, a big round of applause. This was great. I think it's really cool that we can have presenters from around the country going virtually, and we will make the slides available. This presentation will also be available on our YouTube channel, which makes it even more ridiculous that I'm going to read Robin's last statement, which says, big round of applause equals the clap for everyone. I am literally dying right now. I can't wait till our president and CEO watches this. Big thanks to all. Have a great night. We will be back next month, probably virtually again, and we really appreciate Secureworks and all of our presenters. So one big round of applause, and everyone have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.